What has changed? Just last month we were planning our future together. The attic had always been a mysterious place for Eleanor Wright. Growing up, she'd heard her mother refer to it as the keeper of memories, a place where the past was neatly packed away in cardboard boxes and forgotten trunks. But as she stood now at the foot of the narrow staircase that led up to the small door in the ceiling, a sense of trepidation washed over her. At 42, Eleanor had returned to her childhood home not to reminisce, but to prepare the house for sale following her mother's passing 3 months ago. "You don't have to do this today," her husband Michael said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We have the entire weekend." Eleanor shook her head, her chestnut hair brushing against her cheeks. "No, I need to do this now. Mom kept everything up there. If I don't start today, I'll never finish." The stairs creaked beneath her weight as she climbed, each step a reminder of all the years that had passed since she'd last ventured into this space. As a child, the attic had been strictly off-limits, her mother's private domain. The few times Eleanor had sneaked up, she'd been quickly ushered back downstairs with a stern warning. When she pushed open the door, the scent of old books and lavender sachets rushed to greet her. Dust particles danced in the beams of sunlight that streamed through the small dormer window. The attic was more organized than she had expected. Labeled boxes stacked neatly against the walls, old furniture draped with sheets, and a small writing desk positioned directly beneath the window. Eleanor moved carefully through the room, running her fingers along the spines of old photo albums and touching the fabric of her mother's wedding dress, preserved in a garment bag hanging from a beam. The task ahead felt overwhelming, yet there was something comforting about being surrounded by these physical remnants of her family's history. It was when she reached the writing desk that Eleanor noticed the small wooden box tucked beneath it. Unlike the other boxes in the attic, this one bore no label. The wood was dark and polished with intricate carvings along its edges. A jewelry box, perhaps, or a keepsake container. Curious, Eleanor pulled it out and set it on the desk. The box was locked, but Eleanor knew her mother had always kept important keys in the small china bowl on her bedside table. Sure enough, among the collection of keys she'd gathered before coming upstairs was a small brass key that fit perfectly into the lock of the wooden box. Inside, neatly bundled and tied with faded blue ribbon, were dozens of letters. Eleanor lifted the first bundle and examined the envelope on top. The address was written in elegant, unfamiliar handwriting, and the postmark dated back to 1978, the year before Eleanor was born. The recipient was her mother, Claire Wright, at her maiden address. But it was the sender's name that made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. Thomas Elliot. Thomas Elliot. A name Eleanor had never heard before. She untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and began to read. "My dearest Claire, it's been 2 weeks since I last saw you, and each day feels longer than the one before. Boston is beautiful this time of year, but I find myself unable to enjoy it fully, knowing you're so far away. The medical program is demanding as I expected, but I'm excelling in my studies. The professors here are brilliant, and I'm learning so much that will help us in the future. I dream of the day when I'll complete my residency and return to you. Just 2 more years, my love. 2 years, and then nothing will keep us apart again. I've been thinking more about your suggestion that we settle in your hometown. It's a charming place, and I can see us building a life there together. My medical practice, your teaching, and the family we've talked about starting. I received your package yesterday. The scarf you knitted is perfect, and I wear it every morning on my walk to the hospital. It makes me feel as though a piece of you is with me always. Write soon. Claire. Your letters are what keep me going. All my love. Thomas." Eleanor sat back, her mind racing. Thomas Elliot. A doctor. Someone who had clearly been deeply in love with her mother. Someone her mother had loved in return. Yet in all her years, Eleanor had never heard her mother mention this name. Her father, Robert Wright, had been an accountant. He and Claire had been married for 43 years before his death 5 years ago. They had met at a church social, or so the family story went, married within 6 months, and Eleanor had been born the following year. There had never been any indication of another man in her mother's life before her father. Eleanor reached for another letter, this one dated a few months later. My darling Claire, your last letter brought me such joy. I can picture you in your classroom inspiring those young minds. You were born to teach, And hearing about your students makes me smile even on the most exhausting days here. The engagement ring sits in my drawer, waiting for the moment I can place it on your finger properly. I know we've already made our promises to each other, but I want to do this right. When I come home for Christmas, I plan to speak with your parents, though I know your father remains hesitant about my career choice. I believe I can convince him that I can provide you with the stability and happiness you deserve. I've enclosed a small sketch I made of the view from my apartment window. It's not much, but it reminds me of the view from our spot by the lake where we first said, "I love you." Do you remember that day? The rain had just stopped, and everything smelled fresh and new. Much like my love for you. Ever renewing, ever fresh. Forever yours. Thomas. Eleanor's hand shook as she placed the letter back in its envelope. Her mother had been engaged, or nearly engaged, to another man before her father. A man she had clearly loved deeply. What had happened? Why had Claire never mentioned Thomas? The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled Eleanor from her thoughts. Michael's head appeared through the attic door. "Everything okay up here? You've been gone a while." Eleanor hesitated, then gestured to the box of letters. "I found something unexpected." Michael crossed the room and sat beside her on the old trunk that served as a makeshift seat. His eyes widened as Eleanor explained her discovery. "Are you going to read them all?" he asked, picking up one of the bundles. "I think I have to," Eleanor replied. "There's a story here that my mother never told me. I need to understand." Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll bring you some tea. Take all the time you need." As Michael disappeared back down the stairs, Eleanor turned her attention back to the letters. There were so many of them, spanning nearly 2 years. She sorted them by date and continued reading. The letters told a story of deep love, shared dreams, and future plans. Thomas wrote about his medical studies, his hopes of opening a practice in Claire's hometown, and their plans to start a family. Claire's letters were not in the box. These were only the ones she had received and kept, but Eleanor could sense her mother's devotion through Thomas's responses. Then, in the early summer of 1979, the tone of the letters changed. "My dearest Claire, your letter has left me reeling. I've read it a dozen times, hoping the words might somehow change, but they remain the same. You're ending our relationship. You say it's for the best, that we want different things in life, but I don't understand. What has changed? Just last month, we were planning our future together. Is there someone else? You mention a Robert briefly, but give no explanation. Who is he to you? What does he offer that I cannot? Please, Claire, I beg you to reconsider. 2 years is not so long to wait. I love you more than I can express in words, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. With all my heart. Thomas." Eleanor felt a lump forming in her throat. Robert, her father. So this was how it had happened. Her mother had met her father while engaged to Thomas, and she had chosen Robert instead. But why? From the letters, it was clear that Thomas and Claire had been deeply in love. The next few letters were increasingly desperate, as Thomas tried to understand Claire's sudden change of heart. He pleaded with her to explain, to give them another chance. Then, the letters stopped abruptly in August 1979. Eleanor checked the dates. Her parents had married in September of that year, and she had been born the following June. As Eleanor was pondering this, her eyes caught something tucked beneath the final bundle of letters. A sealed envelope addressed to Thomas Elliot, in her mother's handwriting. It had never been sent. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened it. "My beloved Thomas, by the time you receive this letter, I will be married to Robert. I owe you an explanation, one I couldn't give when I ended things between us, because I knew if I told you the truth, you would give up everything for me, and I couldn't let you do that. I'm pregnant, Thomas. With your child. When I discovered this 2 months ago, my first instinct was to call you, to share what should have been joyous news. But then I remembered our last conversation about children, how you wanted to wait until your career was established, how you spoke of 5-year plans and financial stability before starting a family. You have such an important path ahead of you. Your professors speak of you as a future pioneer in cardiology. The world needs your gifts, your healing hands. I couldn't be the one to derail your dreams, to force you into fatherhood before you were ready. Robert is a good man. He knows about the baby, and he has offered to marry me and raise the child as his own. My parents are relieved. You know how traditional they are, how much a scandal would destroy them in this small town. Robert can provide stability and respectability, and he doesn't ask questions about my heart belonging elsewhere. Perhaps someday, when your career is established and your dreams fulfilled, I can find the courage to tell you about your child. Perhaps someday we might even find our way back to each other. But for now, I release you from any obligation to me or this baby. Live your life, Thomas. Heal the world. Know that I will always love you, and that a piece of you will live on in our child. Forever in my heart. Claire. Eleanor stared at the letter, reading it again and again as tears streamed down her face. The implications were overwhelming. If this letter was true, and Eleanor had no reason to doubt it, then Robert Wright was not her biological father. Thomas Elliot was. Her entire understanding of her family, her identity, her very existence had been built on a foundation that was now crumbling beneath her. She thought of her mother, carrying this secret for over 40 years. Had she ever intended to tell Eleanor the truth? Had she ever tried to find Thomas again? And what of Robert, the man Eleanor had called Dad her entire life? Had he known? He must have, according to the letter. He had agreed to raise another man's child as his own, never once giving Eleanor any reason to question his love or devotion. Michael returned with tea to find Eleanor crying softly, the unsent letter clutched in her hands. Without speaking, he sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. "My father," Eleanor whispered through her tears. "My father isn't who I thought he was." She handed Michael the letter, watching his face as he read it. When he finished, he looked up at her with compassion in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked simply. Eleanor shook her head. "I don't know. I feel lost. Like everything I knew about myself has suddenly changed." "You're still you, Ellie," Michael said, using his favorite nickname for her. "This doesn't change who you are. Only some of the circumstances that brought you into the world." Eleanor nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. "I need to find him, Michael. Thomas Elliot. If he's still alive. He's my biological father, and he never knew about me. He deserves to know, and I deserve to know him." Michael squeezed her hand. "Then we'll find him." Finding Thomas Elliot proved more challenging than Eleanor had anticipated. A Google search revealed dozens of Thomas Elliots across the country, including several doctors, but none that matched the specific details she knew about her biological father. He would be in his late 60s or early 70s now, presumably a cardiologist who had attended medical school in Boston in the late 1970s. Eleanor enlisted the help of her cousin, Megan, who worked in healthcare administration. After explaining her situation, Megan agreed to use her professional contacts to search for cardiologists named Thomas Elliot, who had graduated from Boston medical schools in the appropriate time frame. "I can't promise anything," Megan warned during their phone call. "And even if we find him, he might not want to be found. Are you prepared for that possibility?" Eleanor hesitated before answering. "I have to try," she said finally. "Even if he wants nothing to do with me, I need to know who he is. And he should know about me." While waiting for news from Megan, Eleanor delved deeper into the letters, reading them repeatedly as if searching for clues to her own identity. She found herself examining her features in the mirror, wondering which ones might have come from Thomas rather than from her mother. Her dark eyes and prominent cheekbones had always been attributed to her maternal grandmother, but now she wondered if they had come from her biological father instead. She also thought often about Robert Wright, the man who had raised her. He had been a loving, if somewhat reserved father, always supportive of her education and career choices, always present at important events in her life. Had there been moments when he looked at her and saw another man's child? Had it been difficult for him to love her knowing she was not biologically his? Yet Eleanor could recall no moment when his love had seemed forced or conditional. 2 weeks after beginning their search, Megan called with news. "I found him," she said without preamble. "Dr. Thomas Elliot. He graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1981 and went on to become a prominent cardiologist. He practiced at Massachusetts General Hospital for most of his career and was known for pioneering several cardiac surgical techniques." Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. Was He retired 5 years ago, Megan explained. But he's still alive, Ellie. He lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I have an address and a phone number. Eleanor took down the information with shaking hands, thanking her cousin profusely. What will you do now? Megan asked. I don't know, Eleanor admitted. Call him? Write to him? Show up at his door? None of these options seems right. Take some time to think about it, Megan advised. This isn't something you want to rush into. Eleanor agreed, but after hanging up, she found herself unable to think of anything else. How did one approach a stranger to tell them you were their biological child? A child they never knew existed. How would Thomas react to learning that Claire, the woman he had loved and lost over 40 years ago, had kept such a monumental secret from him? In the end, Eleanor decided to write a letter, a fitting approach, given how she had discovered the truth. She spent days drafting and redrafting, trying to find the right words to introduce herself and explain the situation. Finally, she settled on a simple, honest approach. Dear Dr. Elliott, my name is Eleanor Wright. 3 months ago, my mother, Claire Wright née Bennett, passed away. While sorting through her belongings, I discovered a collection of letters written by you to her in 1978 and 1979, as well as an unsent letter she wrote to you explaining why she ended your relationship. I believe, based on the contents of these letters, that you are my biological father. I was born on June 12, 1980, approximately 9 months after my mother's relationship with you ended. The man who raised me, Robert Wright, knew I was not his biological child but chose to marry my mother and give me his name. I don't write with any expectations or demands. I simply felt you had a right to know about my existence, and I would welcome the opportunity to meet you if you are open to it. If not, I will respect your decision and your privacy. I've included my contact information below if you wish to respond. Sincerely, Eleanor Wright. She included her phone number, email address, and home address, then sealed the letter before she could reconsider. Michael mailed it the next day. The waiting was excruciating. A week passed with no response, then two. Eleanor tried to focus on her work as a high school literature teacher, but her thoughts constantly drifted to the letter and whether Thomas had received it, read it, or simply discarded it. Maybe he moved, Michael suggested one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Or maybe he's traveling. There could be any number of reasons why he hasn't responded yet. Eleanor nodded, but a darker thought had begun to take root in her mind. Perhaps Thomas wanted nothing to do with her. Perhaps learning about a biological child after all these years was too disruptive, too painful a reminder of what he had lost. Then, nearly 3 weeks after she had sent the letter, Eleanor's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Her heart leapt into her throat as she answered. Eleanor Wright? The voice on the other end was deep, slightly wavering with age, but clear. Yes, this is she. This is Thomas Elliott. I received your letter. There was a pause, during which Eleanor could hear only her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. I would very much like to meet you, Thomas continued. If you're willing, I could come to you, or you could visit me in Cambridge. Whatever would make you most comfortable. Relief flooded through Eleanor. I would like that too, she managed to say. Very much. They arranged for Eleanor and Michael to travel to Cambridge the following weekend. Thomas offered to meet them at his home, providing an address in a quiet residential neighborhood near Harvard Square. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with nervous anticipation. Eleanor found herself wondering what Thomas would be like. Would she see herself in him? Would there be an instant connection, or would they feel like strangers? She prepared herself for all possibilities, reminding herself that regardless of how the meeting went, she had already gained something valuable, the truth about her origins. On the appointed day, Eleanor and Michael drove to Cambridge. Thomas's home was a handsome brick townhouse with climbing ivy and a small, meticulously maintained garden. Eleanor stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, gathering her courage, before Michael gently squeezed her hand. Ready? He asked. She nodded, and they walked up the path to the front door. Before Eleanor could ring the bell, the door opened, revealing a tall man with silver hair and familiar dark eyes. Eyes like her own. Eleanor, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Dr. Elliott, she replied formally, suddenly unsure of herself. He smiled, a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Please call me Thomas." He invited them inside, leading them to a comfortably furnished living room where tea had been prepared. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and Eleanor noticed several framed medical degrees and awards alongside photographs of landscapes and what appeared to be surgical teams. As they settled onto the sofa, Eleanor found herself studying Thomas's face, looking for similarities. The shape of his hands with long, elegant fingers reminded her of her own, and there was something in the way he tilted his head as he listened that felt strangely familiar, like looking into a mirror and seeing an older male version of herself. "I want you to know," Thomas began, "that I had no idea about you. If I had known Claire was pregnant, nothing would have kept me from being part of your life." "I believe you," Eleanor said, and she realized it was true. The letters had painted a picture of a man deeply in love, committed to building a future with her mother. "I brought some of your letters if you'd like to see them." Thomas's eyes misted as he accepted the small bundle Eleanor had selected to bring. "I kept all of Claire's letters too," he admitted. "For years I couldn't bring myself to read them, but I couldn't discard them either. They're in a box similar to the one you described finding." He paused, running a finger over the faded handwriting on one of the envelopes. "May I ask, was she happy?" "With Robert?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. Her parents' marriage had seemed stable and content, if not passionately romantic. Her mother had been a devoted wife and mother, and her father had been reliable and kind. "I believe she was," Eleanor said finally. "They had a good life together. But she never forgot you. She kept your letters all these years, hidden but preserved." Thomas nodded, a mixture of sadness and acceptance on his face. "And Robert? How was he as a father to you?" "He was wonderful," Eleanor said, feeling a rush of gratitude for the man who had raised her. "He never made me feel anything less than fully his daughter. He coached my softball team, helped me with homework, taught me to drive. Everything a father should do." "I'm glad," Thomas said sincerely, "and grateful to him, though I can't help but feel I missed so much." The conversation flowed more easily after that. Thomas told Eleanor about his life, his distinguished medical career, his brief marriage in his 40s that had ended in divorce, his passion for hiking and landscape photography. He had never had other children, a fact that seemed to both sadden and intensify his interest in Eleanor now. Eleanor, in turn, shared stories of her childhood, her career as a teacher, her happy marriage to Michael. She showed Thomas photos on her phone of her life, including several of Claire in her later years. "She aged beautifully," Thomas commented, his finger hovering over the screen as if he wanted to touch Claire's image but didn't quite dare. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor felt a growing connection with this man who was her biological father. There was no replacing Robert in her heart, but there was room to know and care about Thomas too, to understand this piece of herself that had been hidden for so long. Before they left, Thomas hesitantly asked if Eleanor would be willing to stay in touch, perhaps visit again or allow him to visit her. "I've just found you," he said. "I'd like the chance to know you if you're open to that." Eleanor smiled, feeling a sense of rightness settle over her. "I'd like that too." Over the following months, Eleanor and Thomas built a relationship that neither could have anticipated. They exchanged emails several times a week, sharing thoughts on books they'd both read, discussing Eleanor's teaching experiences, and gradually filling in the gaps of their separate lives. Thomas visited Eleanor in Michael's home in Connecticut, and they made several trips to Cambridge. During one such visit, Thomas showed Eleanor his collection of medical journals featuring articles he'd written, some of which had revolutionized certain cardiac surgical procedures. "I always wondered where my interest in biology came from," Eleanor mused as she flipped through the pages. "Mom was all about literature and history, and Dad, Robert, was firmly in the world of numbers. But I was always fascinated by how things worked, especially living things." Thomas smiled. "I was the same way as a child. My parents thought I'd grow up to be a veterinarian, because I was always bringing home injured birds and squirrels." These little discoveries of shared traits and tendencies became precious to Eleanor. She found that Thomas shared her love of spicy food, her tendency to wake early in the morning, even her habit of dog-earing book pages despite knowing it was considered sacrilege by many readers. The relationship wasn't without complications. Eleanor's extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins on her mother's side, were shocked to learn about Thomas's existence. Some were supportive, seeing how important the connection was to Eleanor. Others were more hesitant, viewing Thomas as an intruder in the family narrative and expressing concern that Eleanor was somehow betraying Robert's memory by embracing her biological father. "Your dad loved you more than anything in the world," her Aunt Patricia said during a tense family dinner. "I just don't understand why you need this stranger in your life now." "He's not a stranger to me anymore," Eleanor replied. "And this isn't about replacing Dad. It's about understanding where I came from, all the pieces that made me who I am." The most difficult moment came when Eleanor visited Robert's sister, her Aunt Susan, who had always been particularly close to her brother. "Did he know?" Eleanor asked hesitantly. "About me not being his biological child?" Aunt Susan's eyes filled with tears. "He knew," she confirmed. "He told me right before you were born. He said it didn't matter to him, that he'd loved you from the moment he knew you existed, and nothing could change that." "Why didn't he ever tell me?" Eleanor asked, her voice breaking. "He wanted to," Susan admitted, "especially when you were older. But Claire was adamant that you never know. She was afraid it would hurt you, make you feel different somehow. And I think part of her wanted to protect Thomas too, to respect the choice she'd made not to disrupt his life and career with an unexpected child." Eleanor nodded, understanding her mother's reasoning even as she wished for a different choice. "I wish I could talk to Dad about it now. Thank him for loving me the way he did. He knew you loved him," Susan assured her. "That was all that mattered to him." As the months passed, Eleanor found herself integrating Thomas more fully into her life. He attended her school's winter concert, where she directed the choir. He joined their family for Thanksgiving dinner, somewhat awkwardly at first, but with growing comfort as the day progressed. And when Eleanor discovered she was pregnant with her first child the following spring, Thomas was among the first to know. "I'm going to be a grandfather," he said wonderingly during their video call, his eyes shining. "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "And I was hoping, if it's a boy, Michael, and I would like to name him Robert Thomas, to honor both of my fathers." The gesture moved Thomas deeply. "I would be honored," he said. "And I think Robert would be too." As her pregnancy progressed, Eleanor found herself returning often to her mother's letters, not just the ones from Thomas, but others she had discovered while cleaning out the house. Letters from friends, from former students, from family members. In them, she found a more complete picture of Claire Bennett Wright, not just as a mother, but as a complex woman who had made difficult choices, who had loved deeply if not always wisely, who had lived with both regrets and joys. It was while sorting through these letters that Eleanor found another sealed envelope, this one addressed to her in her mother's handwriting. Unlike the letter to Thomas, this one was more recent, dated just a year before Claire's death. With trembling hands, Eleanor opened it. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you have likely discovered the truth about your birth father. I've known for some time that I should tell you this truth myself, but courage has failed me again and again. Perhaps leaving this letter is another act of cowardice. But I hope you will understand that it comes from a place of love and fear. Fear of losing your respect, fear of causing you pain, fear of disrupting the family we've built. Thomas Elliot was the great love of my young life. We met during my first year of teaching, when he was home from medical school visiting his aunt, who happened to be our school nurse. It was immediate and intense, the kind of love that seems to exist only in books and movies. We made plans for a future together, dreamed of the life we would build once he completed his medical training. When I discovered I was pregnant with you, I was overjoyed but also terrified. Thomas had spoken often of his 5-year plan: finishing medical school, completing his residency, establishing his practice, and only then starting a family. He was brilliant, destined for greatness in his field, and I couldn't bear to be the reason he abandoned his dreams. Meeting your father, Robert, seemed like fate. He was kind, stable, ready for family life in a way Thomas wasn't yet. When I told him about my pregnancy, he offered me not just his name but his heart. He promised to love my child, you, as his own. And he kept that promise every day of his life. I told myself I was making the best choice for everyone. Thomas would fulfill his potential without the burden of an unexpected family. You would have a stable, loving home with two parents who adored you. And I would have a good life, if not the passionate one I had once envisioned. I never stopped loving Thomas, but I grew to love your father deeply too, in a different way. Robert knew this, knew he wasn't my first love, but he loved me anyway, completely and without reservation. His love for you was even greater, pure and uncomplicated by any knowledge of biology or genetics. If you have found Thomas, I hope you will forgive me for keeping you apart for so long. And I hope you will remember that family is not just about blood, it's about love, choice, and commitment. Robert chose to be your father in every way that matters, and that choice shaped both your life and his immeasurably. I love you, my darling girl. I have loved you from the moment I knew of your existence, and that love has only grown with each passing day. Be gentle with yourself as you process this truth, and know that whatever you feel, anger, confusion, curiosity, is valid and deserving of expression. All my love now and always. Mom. Eleanor read the letter through tears, feeling both the pain of her mother's secret and the depth of her love. She understood now, in a way she hadn't before, the complexity of the choice Claire had made. A choice born not of deception, but of a desire to protect those she loved, even at cost to herself. When Robert Thomas Wright was born in late autumn, he arrived into a family more complex and interconnected than Eleanor could have imagined a year earlier. At his christening, both Michael's parents and Thomas stood as proud grandparents, with Aunt Susan representing the Wright family legacy. The baby had Eleanor's dark eyes and, everyone agreed, Thomas's chin and brow. "He's perfect," Thomas whispered as he held his grandson for the first time. "Absolutely perfect." Looking at them together, her biological father and her son, Eleanor felt a sense of continuity, of past connecting to future in a way that transcended the complications of her own origin story. The circle had somehow completed itself, bringing healing where there had been secrets, and connection where there had been absence. That evening, as she rocked little Robbie to sleep, Eleanor reflected on the journey of the past year. She had begun with a discovery that shook the foundations of her identity, moved through grief and confusion to understanding, and arrived at a place of acceptance and integration. The family she knew had expanded rather than fractured, embracing Thomas not as a replacement for Robert, but as an addition. Another branch on the family tree, another source of love for her child. In the end, Eleanor realized her mother had been right. Family was indeed about more than blood. It was about choices made and commitments kept, about love that transcended biology and circumstance. Robert Wright had chosen to be her father, had loved her unconditionally despite knowing she carried another man's DNA. And now she had chosen to welcome Thomas into her life, to create space for another kind of love and connection. The wooden box of letters now sat on Eleanor's own writing desk in her home office. She had added to it over the months copies of her correspondence with Thomas, her mother's final letter, and a journal she had begun keeping when she first discovered the truth. Someday, she would share these with Robbie, helping him understand the complicated, beautiful tapestry of love and choice that had brought him into the world. For now, though, she simply held her son close, whispering the story of his two grandfathers, one who had loved her enough to claim her as his own without hesitation, and one who had missed the chance to know her as a child but was making up for lost time with his grandson. Both men, in their different ways, were part of the legacy she would pass on to her son. A legacy of love that transcended conventional boundaries, of courage to embrace truth even when it was difficult, and of the healing power of forgiveness and acceptance. As Robbie drifted to sleep in her arms, Eleanor thought of her mother's words. Family is not just about blood, it's about love, choice, and commitment. In the end, she had been fortunate enough to experience all of these, from both of her fathers and from her mother, whose final act of love had been to leave the pathway to truth open for Eleanor to discover when the time was right. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, covering the world in a blanket of pristine white. A clean slate, a fresh beginning. Eleanor smiled, feeling at peace with her past, her present, and the future stretching out before her like an unwritten page, full of possibility and love. The summer sun streamed through the windows of the beach house, casting golden light across the wooden floor where 5-year-old Robbie sat with his grandfather, building an elaborate structure with colored blocks. "Higher, Grandpa Thomas," Robbie encouraged as Thomas carefully placed another block on top of their tower. "All the way to the sky," Thomas laughed, his now fully silver hair catching the sunlight. "If we go much higher, we'll need a ladder," he joked, but he reached for another block anyway, never one to disappoint his grandson. Eleanor watched them from the doorway, a cup of coffee warming her hands despite the summer heat. These moments still filled her with a particular kind of joy, seeing her biological father and her son together, their connection easy and natural in a way that sometimes made her heart ache with thoughts of what might have been if circumstances had been different decades ago. "They're at it again," Michael said, coming to stand beside her. "That tower's going to reach the ceiling at this rate." Eleanor smiled. "Robbie's determined, and Thomas never says no to a challenge." "Like grandfather, like grandson," Michael observed. "Like mother too, come to think of it." The beach house had been Thomas's idea 3 years ago, a place where they could all gather during summers and holidays, building traditions and memories together. Located on the Massachusetts coast, it was close enough to Cambridge for Thomas to visit often, yet felt like a world apart from their everyday lives. This summer was special, the first time they had managed to gather everyone together. Aunt Susan and her husband were staying in a nearby bed and breakfast, Michael's parents had the guest cottage out back, and Eleanor's cousin Megan and her family had claimed the upstairs bedrooms. It was a full house, sometimes chaotic, but filled with the kind of warmth and connection that Eleanor had come to treasure above all else. The crash of the tower collapsing brought her attention back to the living room, where Robbie was giggling amid the scattered blocks. "We'll build it even stronger next time," Thomas promised, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Maybe we need to consult an engineering manual. Or ask Great-Aunt Susan," Robbie suggested seriously. "She said she used to build the best forts." Later that afternoon, as everyone gathered on the beach for a family barbecue, Eleanor sat on a weathered wooden bench watching the waves. Thomas joined her, passing her a glass of lemonade. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. "I was just thinking about Mom," Eleanor admitted. "She would have loved this place. All of us together." Thomas nodded, his expression softening. "Claire always did love the ocean. We once talked about having a beach wedding, back when we were making all those plans." He paused, looking out at the horizon. "Do you think she would have approved of all this?" Eleanor considered the question, watching as Robbie ran along the shore with his cousins, as Aunt Susan and Michael's mother exchanged recipes near the grill, as her husband arranged driftwood for an evening bonfire. "I think she would have been terrified at first," she said honestly. "But seeing everyone together like this, yes, I think she would have approved in the end." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that had become natural between them over the years. "I've been going through some old photographs," Thomas said eventually. "Found some from my medical school days. There's one of Claire visiting me in Boston that I thought you might like to have." Eleanor smiled. "I'd love that. I've been putting together a memory book for Robbie, stories and photos from both sides of his family. I want him to understand where he comes from." "All parts of it," Thomas agreed. The sound of Michael calling everyone for dinner broke their reverie. As they walked toward the gathering, Eleanor felt a sense of completeness that had once seemed impossible. That evening, after Robbie was tucked into bed with stories from 3 different grandparents, Eleanor slipped away to the small study where she kept her writing desk. The wooden box of letters sat open, its contents organized chronologically now, a documented history of love, loss, choices, and reunions. She took out a sheet of paper and began to write, continuing the tradition she had started 5 years ago. "Dear Robbie, when you're older, I'll tell you the full story of how our family came to be. Not just the simple version you know now, but all the complicated, beautiful, painful details. I'll show you these letters that changed everything, that revealed truths long hidden and opened doors to connections I never knew were possible. Today, watching you with both your grandfather's spirits present, Thomas in person and Robert in name and in the stories we tell, I realized that the greatest gift my mother gave me wasn't just life itself, but the possibility of this moment, our family expanded rather than divided by truth. Family isn't just who we're born to. It's who we choose, who chooses us, and how we honor those choices every day with love and presence." You are growing up surrounded by that kind of love from all directions, and my greatest hope is that you'll carry it forward in your own life someday. With all my love, Mom. Eleanor folded the letter and placed it in the box alongside the others, another chapter in their ongoing story. Through the open window, she could hear laughter from the beach where the adults had gathered around the bonfire. Michael's deep chuckle, Thomas's more reserved but genuine laugh, Susan's familiar burst of joy. She closed the box and went to join them, grateful for the complicated journey that had led her here. To this beach, this evening, this family that defied simple definition but was undeniably, unquestionably hers. As she approached the circle of light cast by the fire, Michael reached out his hand to her. Thomas moved over on the driftwood bench, making space for her between himself and Susan. The past and present, once separate narratives in her life, now woven together into a single ongoing story. Just in time, Michael said, pulling her close. Susan was about to tell us about the time your dad, Robert, got lost trying to take you camping. Oh, I remember this. Eleanor laughed, settling in. I was 7, and he was absolutely certain he knew a shortcut. As the story unfolded, one she had heard many times before, Eleanor looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight, some connected by blood, others by choice and circumstance, all by love. The night sky spread above them, vast and star-filled, while the ocean murmured its eternal rhythm nearby. This, she thought, was her mother's true legacy. Not secrets kept but possibilities created, connections that transcended time and circumstance, love that found its way through complicated paths to arrive exactly where it was meant to be.